Okay, so looking at lots of really good answers so far. We've got kind of half of you have voted. Again, you should see a little pop-up or at the bottom of your screen a chance to fill out the poll. Good mix of, 21% of participants this morning are from the direct grower world, 34% independent agronomists, and then there's 60% between ag retail and agriculture technology providers. So really great to see a plethora of people, and hopefully as we get to the Q&A session at the end, we're looking really forward to everybody's feedback and experience. So as we go through the presentation today, make sure to write down your questions. I'll even let you ask them anonymously. So we're looking forward to that. I say majority of the people on the call are actually occasional users or do not use tissue testing at all in their regular management practices. 77% of poll respondents are looking at tissue sampling as a way for driving higher crop yield. So that's interesting to see. 27% are interested in improving their environmental footprint. What's your reasoning for tissue testing? Again, identify nutrient issues, track usage throughout the growing season are two popular answers. And then what I was most interested in, and I think hopefully what we'll be able to answer with you guys today, is one of the biggest challenges that most respondents of the poll are seeing is that they don't understand what the reports are telling me. So I know Chris from A&L and Mike from Deveron will be really excited to walk everyone through that. So here we are getting into the top of the 5 minutes after the hour here. So I'll keep the poll open for another few minutes just as everybody else comes online. Just a reminder also that we're recording the webinar, and shortly after we finish, it'll be made available on the internet, so you can digest it at some time in the future. And we'd love for you to share it on social media or with anybody in your farm world that you think might find value in it. So here as we get started, as I say, this morning's webinar is put on by Deveron and A&L Canada Laboratories, and the title of today's webinar is Tissue Testing Made Easy. My name is David McMillan. I'm the President and CEO of Deveron. Excited to be your moderator here this morning. I'm going to walk you through just really briefly the agenda for the webinar, who also we will be working with and doing the presentation, and then I'll come back online at the end to moderate a Q&A session. So with that, we'll kind of get going here, and thank you all again for taking the time on a beautiful sunny day up here in Canada. Hopefully the weather's great in your part of the world, and we'll get started. So first and foremost, today's speakers from Deveron, we have Mike Wilson. Mike is the head of our data collection business. So he's the guy that's managing people all across the United States and Canada and helping figure out how we bring tissue testing and soil sampling out to the masses. And Mike's been in agriculture for over 25 years, sort of walked through all different types of the world, and has, I think, spent the last part of his career really focused on driving value with data on the farm. Chris Meyer comes to us from A&L. Chris is the business development lead with A&L and has spent over 30 years in the ag industry. So I think between both of them, we're going to be able to do a really great webinar and give you guys some great perspective into everything. So today's agenda is really the agronomic benefits of tissue testing, our views a bit on plant monitoring programs. There's a little bit here on how you submit samples to A&L and Deveron, and how our services and coverage can actually work to hopefully make tissue testing a little bit easier. We'll go through the how to order and turnaround times, and then we'll talk through a Q&A where hopefully everyone will be able to ask a whole bunch of great questions. So with that, I'm going to turn over the screen to Mike Wilson. So I'm just going to stop my sharing, and then Mike's going to take over. So just give me a second here as we make that happen. So just as Mike gets his presentation up and going, again, I just wanted to thank everyone for joining us this morning for Tissue Testing Made Easy on behalf of Deveron and A&L. So with that, we'll let Mike take it from here.
Everything's looking good there, David?
Yep, you're perfect.
Perfect. Thank you very much, and good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining the webinar. Looking forward to sharing with you some of our experiences with tissue testing and showing you some of the services we have to offer you all to try to make it a little bit easier and a little more streamlined so you can focus on the important tasks and let the field work be done by others. So first, I wanted to talk, Chris and I, a little bit around the agronomic benefits of tissue sampling. I found the poll results very interesting, kind of on par with what I saw in my 15 to 16 years in ag retail. Often a lot of confusion around what the results mean, not sure how to do the test properly, not sure how to create value to my customer once I get the reports back, so on and so forth. So the key to tissue testing is really getting that in-season check of how the crop's performing. It's basically your fuel gauge for the crop. How's the crop performing in different areas of the field? What are my limiting nutrients? What decisions can I make in season, and more importantly, post-season, and to my fertility plan to begin to correct some of these problems. It really allows us to determine the crop uptake and limiting nutrients during those key growth stages. Starting a tissue program early in the season can really start to help track how the nutrients are changing within the crop with multiple visits throughout the season to see when nutrients become deficient and at what key growth stages that is happening. A very interesting thing that people often misunderstand is that the high yield areas have a higher demand and a higher uptake requirement, therefore often show up as our shortest and most deficient areas in the field, which we don't often think of as agronomists. Usually we think of our problem areas being the ones that are most at risk and the areas we can fix first. That is the case in some areas, but often some of those low-lying areas are a water issue or a soil texture issue or a planting issue, poor root growth, smeared sidewalls, whatever it is. And the plant just can't get the nutrients. It doesn't mean they're there. But in those higher yielding areas, those areas typically are always higher yielding, and therefore we've mined the soil potentially, and you might see on your soil tests that those are your lowest testing levels on P and K and some of the other measures. So it only makes sense that your tissue test would be low there as well. A really nice fit for tissue testing when in a precision ag or a prescription type world is doing a ground truth check before you start to push higher rates to see if those high yielding areas can actually withstand more. If you're at 250 bushel corn in that really good growthy area and your soil test levels are just adequate, and then we build a seeding prescription or a nitrogen prescription to push to try to hit 300 bushels in those areas, now all of a sudden we don't have enough fertility and the crop runs short. And a tissue test is a sure sign to show us that. It'll show us the areas where we're just borderline, and it'll show us the areas where we need to improve so that we can make a better decision saying, okay, how hard can I push certain areas? Where can I get the extra yield on my farm? And things to make some better judgment calls and some better decisions, before we spend the money on some of those more inputs or more things to try to increase yield. It also allows us to make better in-season adjustments so that we can prevent some of those nutrient deficiencies, so we can maximize yield, with some foliar products and things like that. Now, ultimately, foliar products are more of a Band-Aid than a cure, but they can really help us out and get us through some crunch periods where deficiencies are there due to maybe some dry weather or some other factor that's affecting the crop short term. Obviously, better understanding of our crop needs and complementing a soil sampling program and our soil health information is key so that we can fix those problems long term and begin to see the deeper reasoning for what's going on in those different areas. And obviously tissue testing gives us the ability to gain proper field knowledge so we can adjust those fertility programs and prevent those hidden hungers in either direction as we move forward for the crop in previous years. So, Chris, is there anything you want to add there on the agronomic side?
No, I think you've covered it quite well, Mike. Nope,
Okay.
Continue on.
Great. I'll let you take that one.
All right. So there's different ways of doing it for monitoring your crop within the field. And we do offer a service called Plant Monitoring Program, where we do more of a plant analysis over a time frame in specific locations within the field. And you can follow the nutrient levels within those tissues, depending on what crop it is. And it could be for anything as the season goes on. And you can find and possibly fine tune if you're starting to fall into some deficiency locations within that field itself. So what you're trying to do, you're taking this maybe once every 2 weeks. You're looking at, and on our reports, we have kind of a range where those analysis numbers should fall within, and you try to monitor where your nutrient is for that crop in that time frame. And then as that time goes on, you might be okay. And then as that crop starts to mature and farther along, your nutrient level should actually decrease because that plant is utilizing those nutrients as time goes on. And so when we do these, you want to make sure you're using the representative area within your field, and then you're constantly monitoring those same locations throughout that growing season. And so when you're, you want to monitor, those concentrations throughout the growing season. And when tissue testing, you'll be able to see some of these deficiencies showing up earlier than you would visually as you're looking at that crop. So then you can go in and possibly do a foliar application or a side dress application to try to correct those deficiencies before they become a yield issue within that crop. And also what you do, what we say in stage 3, what we do after sampling. So if you are identifying some of these issues within the field, a foliar may not be an answer to it, where you can go back and do a fertilizer adjustment in your following year and those crop for the next year, and forward in multiple years after that to try to correct those areas. So when you're doing some of that, a poor or low testing tissue test does not always mean it's a poor crop. It just sometimes means that there's a big demand by that crop for some nutrients in there, and we want to make sure that it's utilizing it at the most efficient way it possibly can. You can do the next slide if you want.
Perfect. Right on, Chris. And that's something I wanted to add here too is, there's different approaches to tissue testing. I mean, you can go out when you see a problem and just do a high testing area or a high vegetative area and the problem area to better understand what's going on. Or you can go through an approach and be a little more proactive, like with the plant monitoring program, like Chris just explained, where you identify those production areas in the field, you start sampling early, and you take that measured approach throughout the season and you try to learn and understand what's happening and when, and correct the problem before you actually see it. So both work, just depends on the need and what you're trying to get out of it. So wanted to go a little bit into some of the economic benefits with the program and the offers that we have in place. Some of the biggest issues we have as ag retailers or agronomists is just plain time and efficiency and resources to get some of these things done. With the Deveron collection side of things for you, we're guaranteeing you the accuracy with professionally trained collection crew, collecting the proper plant part for the growth stage of the crop at the proper time in that season. It definitely gives you all improved time management, so you can focus on the priority tasks. You know, for the customers out there, you can stay in the sprayer and keep managing the fields the way that is. For the agronomists, you know, we're pulled in 100 different directions this time of year. Sometimes finding the time to get to the field is just very tough. So, you know, allows you to focus on those priority tasks, and allows you to keep pushing through, you know, the important parts of the business. It really simplifies the program for you. Basically, it's place the order online or with the paper submission form that Chris will get into here shortly, and then wait for the results to come back from A&L. Everything in the middle is taken off your plate. There's no shipping, there's no in the field measurement, there's no delivery stress. It's just place the order and get the results. We've made it very simple. Placing your orders online through the A&L website moves you very quickly, so you can get on to your next task with confidence, knowing that you'll see your results in a couple days. And it also makes it very scalable. Our network, as David mentioned earlier, is right across North America. We aren't in every state, but are in quite a few, and do have some contractors available. But in Canada, Ontario, Quebec, the Maritimes, Saskatchewan, and Alberta are all fully covered, and we are ready to go and assist in any way possible with this. So I'm going to talk about two different approaches today. You know, the bulk testing comes, you know, it's like we said, we're taking a couple samples from a field usually. That can be ramped up or simplified depending on your needs or your customer's needs. But basically the bulk testing is one sample from a good area and one sample from a bad. Don't let that cost there scare you away too much. It can be, you know, talked through, and obviously discounts apply. The hardest part for us is getting to the location. So if we're going to one field in an area, that's fairly expensive and very tough. But for the ag retailers and service providers on the call, if we can get 5 to 10 growers in an area with 2 or 3 fields each, and you know, we're there for half a day and we're taking 25 to 30 samples, all of a sudden that collection cost becomes very cheap, very efficient, and is very competitive in the marketplace. And you know, that's the situation we want to try to look for and work towards. And for this case, you as the agronomist know the field very well. You probably know the areas you want sampled. There's very little work on our side to try to understand and determine, so it can be very quick and very efficient, and we can get the data out as quick as possible and fairly cheap. The A&L fee on top of it, as Chris will get into here shortly, there's a bunch of different options. These are the two main that happen, and that would be associated depending on which nutrients you're looking for and what fee you know, you're looking to get out of it. For the customers on the call that are looking for some support and some added value on this, I think this may be of more interest. It gets the price more into a reasonable range, and it also gives you a lot more value out the back end of it. So with the drone assisted testing, we're using imagery to target those areas in the field that we need to figure out what's going on. So for the $6, you get the flight, the image back for you, and the collection of 2 tissue tests per field. The analysis fee, again, would be extra. So what this does is it guarantees that we're sampling the high and low vegetative areas. We'll physically fly the UAV over your field, do some processing along the roadside, and then go back in and test the high and low areas and get a better understanding of what's going on. Because we now have that field measured, and we can see the vegetation zones, we have the ability to accurately draw zones. So we can go back and soil test the field in the fall to correct some of those major nutrient issues and find out what's actually going on. Because those zones are actually also drawn and we have the image, we can also do in-season prescriptions now from that same image. So if we do uncover something with that tissue test, then based on your needs and what your goals are, you could go back in and do a on-off or a variable rate prescription with a foliar product to try to fix and correct those deficiencies where they're hurting you most. Also, that image will be in your possession. So if you are utilizing crop scouting practices or things like that, that image could be passed along to that provider, and they could use it for scouting and other things as the season goes. So a lot more value here with just adding that simple flight in, and gives you a lot more information and knowledge on how to act and how to respond to what we're looking at. So just a quick example of what it could look like. If this was your field, the UAV would fly, we'd get a very quick map along the side of the road that looks like this. It was then very simple for our scouts, or our pilots or our collection staff to walk back into the field, grab 2 samples very quickly in the high-low yielding areas, log the points if you're on the plant monitoring program, so you can go back and measure them as the season progresses and go from there. Obviously, if you wanted to intensify this approach and measure more of the areas in the field, that could be done. Obviously, cost structure would have to change slightly, but would be open and willing to work with anybody on a program that would work sufficiently. Chris, I'll let you go into the reports here, but this is kind of the 2 types of reports you would get back once that's done. So you see in the top left corner, if you're just under the tissue testing place, you would get 1 for the high area, 1 for the low area. If you were doing the plant monitoring type approach that Chris was talking about earlier, you would get a report similar to the bottom that kind of shows the different dates sampled and how those nutrients are trending as the year goes on. So Chris, I'll let you go in deeper on what the reports are showing and telling and what the customer can get out of them.
Sure, we can do that. So the standard analysis report that you see, so say for instance, you're doing a high producing area, low producing area, you'll get a report, everything's in percentages of what the nutrient concentration is. And then we put on it what the normal range would be. And here's a really good point. When we're doing tissue testing, we really need to know what stage that crop is at, because those ranges will change as the crop matures. And so as we are looking at those numbers, you try to want to have everything in a balance, of course, but to fall within that normal range. And you can see it visually on the bar graph below. We have some in the green, which would mean it's sufficient, but some are in the yellow, which means they're in a lower level. And you can see within the ranges that, say, for instance, sulfur on this example is just on the low end of the what is required for that crop. And the same with some mag and calcium, boron, and manganese. But we also look at some of the other ones that you may not want in a too higher range, because that could cause some issues down the road and potential toxicity. And we'll get into that a little bit later too. So you kind of want to have it a balance on that chart. And also we look at different ratios of different nutrients as well. So nitrogen to sulfur, for instance, especially on, say, a wheat crop or a canola crop, very important there to have those ratios in a balance. So you may have sufficient levels, but the ratios are out of whack. And so you got to be careful, because all these nutrients interact with each other within the plant and how they're utilized. So trying to make sure that you have adequate levels, but also the ratios of those nutrients in relation to other ones are in a balance as well. Looking at the plant monitoring program goes a little bit more into detail on how that crop is progressing as time goes on within that growing season. And so we do multiple sampling over a time frame. We use a lot of this in the potato industry, for instance. And so you can see on the chart, say for instance, nitrogen at the beginning falls within, on the growing season, it's tracked on the graph as it progresses within in the growing season. And so the colors, which I have a hard time seeing, the excessive or the high ranges in green, the low levels in red, and where we want to be is in the blue level, I do believe, on these, if I can see that.
Yes, blue, green, and red.
Yeah, if I'm reading that properly. So you want to do that with each nutrient as we track it. So some of these higher value crops, we do a lot of this. We do some of it with canola as well. There are guys doing it with corn and soybeans just to see where they're at as well. But a lot of the time, the plant monitoring, tobacco, a lot of the vegetable crops, we do a lot of this tracking. And so you want to make sure that your tissue test falls within that graph range. And like I said, as time goes on, certain nutrients are required less amounts, and some are required more in demand as that crop gets closer to maturity.
Great.
I think we can go to the next one there, Mike. So yeah, so when you're looking at these, you're trying to measure the concentrations of those nutrients in the leaf itself. The analysis is based on the concept that that nutrient level is present, making sure that it's effective of the plant growth that we're looking at. We're not looking at, what we thought we were feeding it on the fertility side is what actually that crop is taking up. And that relationship is really what we're looking at, and that's where on the graph on the other side there, we want to make sure that we're at the, in the right level and not getting into that, excessive range, the luxury range we call it, or the toxic range, because that could cause yield decreases or crop injury if we over apply certain nutrients. So once again, we want to get that balance of nutrients within that plant. We also, and why we want to monitor that, because again, the plant will take those nutrients up at different times and requirements throughout the growing season. Some nutrients like boron doesn't really move within the plant that much. So looking at concentrations, but it's required a lot for helping potassium cycle nutrients within the plant. So you got to look at the relationships between the two of them during that growing season. And so we use this critical level approach for interpreting our analysis within our reports.
Great. Yeah, and also, as we mentioned earlier, for those areas of the field that you want to push harder, your higher yielding areas, if a tissue test today tells you you're at that critical level, excellent. I mean, that's where you want to be. You're not over applying, you're not under applying. But if we want to try for more bushels and more yield out of that area, then that critical level might be too low. So having an understanding of where you're at and where those deficiencies potentially are or will be if you make a management change in your operation is key to making sure the success of all those experiments and trials you're doing it works and is there and you understand what's going on in the background. So.
Yeah, very good. Yeah, good point, Mike. So process is pretty easy for us. This is a sample of a submission form. You fill out the information. We have, how you identify it, what analysis you want, what crop you have. The important thing, again, making sure you put down the proper stage when you did the sample at, or when we're doing the sampling, and the date that we sampled it, and send it off to the lab.
Perfect. Yep. And, for the collection side of things, a simple order detailing where the field is, where the boundary is, what analysis you would like, and the rest can be looked after by the technician doing the work and the A&L and Deveron team.
And another way we can do it, there's an app that you can download, and it's a smart submit, and you can already have some of this information already from our data web, and you can just create a QR code or off our system, and you can have labels already pre-done, and you just attach them to the bags and click on the on the app, and they're submitted, sent right to our lab. And then when the samples show up, all that information is already there for them when they're receiving it. So kind of a seamless way of submitting information. So some of that can be done ahead of time through our data web portal.
Great, Chris. And
that's kind of the what it looks like if you go into our data web. It's on our website. If you have an account number, you just type in your account number and your password, and within that, just follow the instructions there for under submission, and you can get everything set up there and have everything pre-done if you want it that way. And we can do that too, I think, Mike, on your end, if for a customer, have all that information done ahead of time. So
yes,
it's streamline what needs to be done out in the field.
Yep, great. So yeah, oh, go ahead, Chris, sorry.
Oh, it's okay. And then these are some of the different analysis that we do. So the PT1's our most common one. Does most of the major nutrients that we require. If we're doing petioles, here is more on, say, a potato crop, for instance. We're looking at that nitrate level. We add that into on that one. We also can do tubers, fruits, the actual vegetables, fruiting crop itself. We do a lot of apples, and so we like to do those early in the season. So we'll take actual the small apple and send those in to see where our nutrient level is. The guys that I'm working with right now can adjust fertility through fertigation, so they can adjust those requirements that tree's taken up during the growing season as well. So, and if there's something that you want on the side, like just a straight nitrate test, or if you want to see a sugar content like the bricks, we can do that too. And those will be add-ons as time goes on.
Perfect.
By the time, oh, yeah, and just on the we can do that. You can do that, Mike.
Okay.
Just timing I was going to go through.
Oh, sure. Completely open to you guys, the customer. If you want to collect samples yourself, wonderful. A&L has the full suite of ordering tools there, as you say. Yeah, and they'll get that back to you. If you want collection done, for you, like as I mentioned earlier, here are the areas where we definitely have capability and nodes with full-time staff able to do collections for you. Outside of these circles, there's still definite possibility. It just will take a little more work and legwork on our end to find the right person to get that done. But definitely have the capability to get in the field this time of year for you within 2 days of you placing the order. We have enough staff in place to make this scalable, on millions of acres. The software requirements with A&L and the logistics tools we have in the background make it very easy for us to logistically move data from one area to the other, and getting you what you need very quickly. This allows us to standardize our sampling protocols to make sure we're sending the very best tissues and very best data to the lab for them to analyze. And as mentioned earlier, it definitely improves the resources on your teams and makes it a more effective way for you guys to get the data collected. So yeah, as Chris was mentioning, the scheduled collections with us guarantees we know where we're going to be and we'll be there when you need us. And we guarantee same-day shipping to the lab from when the tissues are collected. So that way the lab gets it as fresh as it can be, with the amount of nutrients as unchanged as possible. And, with their guarantee of 1 business day turnaround, that gets you some pretty quick information back that you can act on and make some good decisions, as the season progresses. So with that, I'll turn it back over to David, and I've opened it up for some questions. And yeah, thank you all, and thank you, Chris, for joining me on the webinar.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Mike and Chris. That was really great. We've had a bunch of questions kind of come in as you guys were walking through the material. So maybe what I'll do is I'll just remind everybody that at the bottom of your screen, I believe there's an opportunity to just type in a question that you might have in the Q&A button. So I encourage you to do that, and we'll go through kind of as many as we can get to. I think the goal is sort of to finish the webinar by maybe about 5 to noon here. But as I say, we can get through as many as we can. Why don't I start with a few that I have, and maybe this is for both of you. The question specifically was, what nutrients can be monitored better with tissue sampling versus soil sampling? So I guess a comparison of, are you choosing one or the other for certain things you're looking for? And then the other one as a follow-up is, can tissue testing verify if a product has been effective? And then at the same time, is it best practice to also soil sample an area that you specifically tissue tested? So I'll let you guys, Mike, maybe you want to start with that?
Sure. Yeah, and I don't know if best way to measure a certain nutrient is the right way to look at that. I think both practices, being soil being one and tissue testing being the other, offer a different way to test for nutrients. Soil testing, I would say, is like, I think of it like of a car. Soil testing tells us the amount of nutrient in the tank that could be available to the crop. Tissue testing tells us how much fuel is actually getting into the combustion chamber itself and actually producing yield and making the plant function. There's lots of different stages throughout the process that can prevent nutrient from getting into the plant. Soil can tie up nutrients. We can have some rooting issues or drought weather or things like that that are preventing things. So I think both work well, but both are for a slightly different purpose. To answer that other question, yes, absolutely, the two, soil testing and tissue testing, should work in collaboration with each other. Soil sampling is going to tell us the major big issues, the problems, the limiting features in the soil, whereas tissue testing will allow us to gut check that, validate those results, prove that it's working, but also begin to show us a little more in-depth look into, as Chris mentioned, those ratios within the plant. Just because the soil test is adequate doesn't mean the plant is picking up or using those nutrients in the most efficient manner. So what can we do to adjust, one, the soil, and two, the plant with an in-season application of something to maximize our yield potential and be as economically viable as possible. Chris, do you want to add anything?
Yeah, describe that very well and explain that. And I would agree. You look at your soil test as, your basis for your fertility program for your crop. Tissue sampling will tell you how well that fertility program is working. And you can actually fine tune with, say foliars, or, find out later on that maybe one item that you were trying to correct on in the fertility program was causing another issue, and that's what pulls up in those ratios. And we'll see that as time goes on. So yeah, I would agree how they both go kind of hand in hand, that you need kind of one to help with the other one to justify what you've been doing on your fertility program, and the tissue will show you how well you are doing that.
Great. Thanks, Chris and Mike. And I think a follow-up question here that's maybe a good one to ask is, comes from Doug Grandel. How soon after your foliar application would you typically see a change in the plant if you sampled?
Chris, you've seen a lot of those plant monitoring reports with the vegetable guys. Maybe you can comment on how you see that progress as nutrients are applied.
Yeah, so this day and age, there's a lot of newer foliar type products that you can apply, and a lot of them are more efficient and effective in what they're doing than, say, maybe 10, 15 years ago. And so usually within a week, you will see a change within that crop. Most of the time, it's within the plant within that same day. but visually, most of what I've seen is within the week. So if you're doing a plant monitoring process, if you're doing it every 2 weeks, that second week will show if you've actually done a correction that you were trying to accomplish with that foliar application.
Sure. And would it be fair to say that usually with the amount of nutrients being applied in a foliar application that you would only expect 2 to 3 weeks of benefit from it and maybe be looking at an additional one? Or what are your thoughts there?
Yeah, possibly. I think environment plays a big factor, you know, on how well that is, you know, soil moisture, rainfall,
Yes.
you know, temperature, all these other factors are going to call into that. But yeah, foliars are usually just a kind of like a Band-Aid trying to fix a problem for that growing season. It's not going to fix a soil problem that you've seen from your soil test.
Sure. It's a booster shot to get you through a period of stress, and hopefully weather corrects it. If it doesn't, then more may be required.
Yes. So you may have to do multiple applications.
Sure.
And I think you guys answered this, but just to clarify, so how soon or how much time do you have to correct the foliar issue that's been identified? Do you want to expand on that at all, or you think you're good there?
Well, I think a lot of that's going to depend on the crop that you're dealing with at the time. Some like say a potato crop, for instance, you kind of need to do that fairly rapidly, or else you're going to lose, tuber weight in a hurry. Where, you know, say a corn or soybean crop, you may have a little bit more time frame to try to correct that.
I mean, if the crop's in a deficiency state, the sooner the better. I mean, the sooner you can get the crop healthy and growing, the more chance you have to keep, you know, it performing and putting bushels, you know, onto the ear, into the pod, right? Yeah, I think from time the tissue sample's taken to the result, I mean, you want to get in there as soon as you can to correct the problem. As Chris mentioned, you know, a nice rain event under some dry conditions will probably do far more than any foliar product would do, you know, under drought. But, you know, predicting the weather is very difficult, and depending on the nutrient that's short and what the underlying soil conditions are, you may still be deficient after that as well. So there's a lot of factors going on. This is just another really beneficial tool to help you better understand that and make some smarter decisions.
Okay, thanks, guys. Another question here is from Larry Duran. How much information am I losing if I only sample from good areas in the field, as opposed to sending 2 samples, one from healthy areas and one from lower producing areas?
Yeah, I think I wouldn't say you're losing valuable information. You just might not be seeing the whole story, or you know, you might not be able to understand the differences between your low yielding, your average yielding, and your high yielding areas in the field. If you only sample the good areas in the field, you might get a false sense that you know, your field is low everywhere, depending on when the sample's taken. As we mentioned, that those low yield or those high yielding environments have a huge draw and a huge demand for nutrient at certain times. And if you sample at one of those times, your tissue test might come back in the, you know, low testing zone, when in fact, you know, it might be a little bit of a concern, but it's nothing to, you know, make a drastic judgment call and go apply something to the whole field over. Whereas, you know, if you test only your low yielding areas of the field and you have a major nutrient deficiency, obviously that's going to lead to some improper information as well. Or it could just be that it's a water issue in those areas and all the nutrient levels come back fine, and you are left scratching your head, just confused as, well, how can the crop look like it does and my nutrients all be fine on a tissue test? So, you know, learning how the different areas of your field are performing, and looking at that, you know, in comparison with one another really helps to diagnose what we're seeing and why, and have a better understanding across the field.
And I think that's why it's very good idea to do a lot of site-specific sampling instead of just doing bulk soil sampling to identify those areas within those fields as well.
Yes, good point, Chris. I mean, if you already know going in with a site-specific sample what the soil has available, then the tissue test then begins to make a whole lot more sense, and you can start to understand what the crop needs are and make some better decisions.
Okay, thanks, guys. So changing gears a little bit, here's a question for all you canola and cereal growers. The different ratios that are on the reports, what do they determine in helping to attain your yield target in cereals and canola?
So when you're looking at those ratios, so when you get those reports, they are specific by crop. And so each crop has a different ratio level that we're wanting to have within that. So making sure that this is where the balanced nutrition comes into play. So you want to make sure you start with a balanced fertility program to start with, and then your tissue testing will see if you're actually achieving that goal of being balanced and making sure that plant is taking up those nutrients and being efficient and effective utilizing those. So that's really what the basis of those ratios are for, is just making sure that what you've done in your fertility program is actually the plant is utilizing.
Chris, and those ratios are developed by all the research and results you've seen from A&L over the years?
A&L, yep. A lot of years of research have gone into that, so probably over 30 years.
Perfect.
Here's a question, I guess, also maybe to Chris, but around specifically some of the logistics. So this question is, are we planning to have a location to send tissue tests closer to Western Canada? I find a big issue is having people wait several days to know what to spray. And I'm sure, as everyone knows, convincing a farmer that he should sit around when he wants to spray is always difficult. So maybe you guys have a few ideas there.
So we do have people based in Western Canada. And so our local reps, which are probably not listed on our webinar right now, we do have Jill in kind of southeast, Saskatchewan, Manitoba area. We got Noah up near Saskatoon, and then we have Norm out in BC that covers into Alberta as well. So they can probably coordinate with you where we can get samples kind of collected and then sent off that way.
Yeah, and there is no other testing facility in Western Canada. It's here in Ontario. So the goal is get them sampled, preferably in the morning in the Purolator bag into the lab next day, with some freight. That's our goal with our sampling team. I see one of the other questions there. What's the crew size in the Western Canada? So any of our crew would try to aim for that approach. Tissue tests in the morning, get the sample shipped out as soon as possible, and it's more expensive, but priority shipping overnight, and then get it to the lab that next day to try to cut down that turnaround time to the grower. We realize it's not perfect, but it is a work in process. We have 2 samplers in Saskatchewan currently. We have 2 people in Alberta. As Chris mentioned, he has their reps as well, and we have some third-party contractors that are willing and able to step up if demand increases and we need to sample more acres. So with the demand today, we're ready to go, and we'll see what go from there.
Thanks, guys. So I'm just we have a couple of minutes left and still lots of questions. What we'll do maybe is we can also follow up with folks that have asked questions if you don't get specifically answered after. But I would like to, here's one other good one. I thought that was around timing. So how large mature does a plant need to be for an accurate tissue test? I don't know, Chris, maybe that's a good one for you to tackle.
Yeah, so it depends on the crop that you're asking about, but sooner the better would be the answer that I would give to that.
Yeah, I would agree. The size of the crop is not as relevant as growth stage and nutrient demand at each growth stage, and every crop is a little different in that approach. And if you have any questions for your specific crop, and the A&L team is more than happy to help, or we can assist as well. But it's more understanding when the crop goes into that rapid growth, or what nutrients are required at different stages of the crop, and what's deficient in your soil. So it's not really necessarily size of plant, but more that growth stage and the nutrients available in your field.
Great, thanks, Mike. Just looking at a couple here. We've kind of covered a few of them. Kathy has a good question here. Are the ratios set up for the specific regions, Chris? I know you mentioned they're somewhat crop specific, but are they also specific to region?
More geared to the crop itself. There is some regional background into it, but majority of it's based on the crop that we're looking at specifically.
Okay, perfect.
Yep.
And then one more question on the ratios, and Mike, if you want to jump in after that too. Don't the ratios also give you insight into understanding quality and pest pressure?
Yes. Yeah, for sure. And that's, yeah. I think the same thing answers both, right? Yeah. A plant itself grows and wants to have the same set of ratio and same nutrient demand no matter what region it grows in. A healthy plant is a healthy plant, and the ratios need to be at a certain level for that plant to be healthy. What changes in each region is soil type, available nutrients to that crop, the fertility program, and the recommendations we must make because of those environmental changes that affect that crop. Those are all those amazing things that you as the local agronomist and you as the expert need to know, and how to make those ratios fit into your recommendations so that you can correct those different aspects of your region. Same thing with diseases and insects. A healthy, well-balanced crop, just like a healthy human, can resist a lot more diseases and parasites and things like that than one that's weak and struggling. So having those nutrient balances in check keeps the plant healthy, makes it more resilient, makes it stronger to those external stresses, and so on and so forth. So I think that dives in a little bit more to having that local expert on board, to make that final recommendation, but using tools like this to make that expert more efficient and able to assist more customers.
Yep. And a healthier plant that's not under stress does not attract pests as much as, say, a plant under stress. So yeah, trying to keep it as stress-free as possible will help ward off some of the insect pressure too as well.
Okay, perfect. Thanks, guys. There was one or two questions that we weren't able to get to, and just in the interest of time and being respectful for all of you that took the time today to join with us, we will follow up with email. And additionally, this webinar is recorded, so we'll make it available. All of our contact information will be available there as well, so you guys can all reach out to us. I'm sure the team from A&L has all sorts of solutions around logistics and getting your samples back to you quickly that we'd love to go through. And I know Deveron on our end is wanting to work with everybody to figure out how we accelerate this, because I think both of us understand the importance of this turnkey offering and getting your results back to you as fast as possible. So again, thank you so much for taking the time this morning on behalf of myself and Mike from Deveron and Chris from A&L. We really appreciate it. This is another one of our series in our webinars moving forward, where we really hope we can bring more information and education to the world of agriculture. So please share with all your networks on social media and email your friends and tell them that you learned one or two things this morning. And thanks so much for your time this morning. Have a great rest of the season, and we'll talk to everybody soon.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.